is also a philosopher who has something to say. I know that you want to hear what he has to say tonight, and it is a deep privilege and an honor to present to you Mr. James Baldwin.
Thank you all. Can you all hear me? Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay. I'm very proud to be here tonight. And before I say anything at all, I want to say that I'm very proud of all those marvelous people who preceded me. I mean, the choir and those actors and a whole lot of other people who are mainly invisible. But I love them all. Now, I'm going to try to be as honest as I can. And I'm going to ask you to bear with me, and let's try to make a certain journey together. We know in what context we're all here and for what reason. And in our various ways we know what terrible trouble we are in. But let us pretend for the moment that it is possible to drop out of the mind labels and slogans. Let us pretend that we can get beneath and beyond the phrase civil rights to what we are really concerned with. Let us consider a life, which begins in fluid and in darkness. Everybody's life begins there. And according to mysteries which we do not understand, is nourished for a certain amount of time and then abruptly hits the terrifying air. This life opens its eyes not really on the world, but on its mother and its father, which it is compelled to trust since it is helpless. Through its mother and its father, it begins to discover such details as oranges, such details as hunger, such details as panic, such details as loneliness. By and by, this life realizes that in fact it is trapped between a silent heaven and an extremely bloody earth, and has somehow, in order to maintain itself, begin to define the world around it. That world has already, in some sense, been defined by what his mother and his father believe, and what his mother and father have told him, and what his mother and father endure. The child knows, for example, before he knows it, and long before he can say it. What has happened to his father at work that day? The child knows, and he doesn't tell his mother or his father that he knows. When his father is ashamed of himself, the child knows why his mother looks that way on payday, and knows what those strangers, sometimes called welfare workers, sometimes called teachers, sometimes called cops, are doing in his house, what they are doing to his mother and his father, and what they are doing to him. Now, a child's technique is silence. I mean, I know the children rant and rave and scream and throw tantrums, but essentially his technique is silence. When he's really discovering something, when he is really hurt, when it really matters, you got to coax it out of the child. If you love the child, if you're not too ashamed of yourself, and if you have the time. Now, the child we're considering is every child, every life. But this particular child is also, let us say, at this moment, a black child. And one of the things that is happening to him, though he does not know it, cannot say it, is that the world in which he finds himself, and in which he is trying to become defined, and which he is trying to control by naming things, that is all the word noun means. One tries to control the life around you by telling yourself what it is. So if you know that it's an apple or a chair, you think you know something about it. It's better than having no name at all. This child in this republic looks around him one fine day and discovers no reflection of himself whatever. As far as the world in which he finds himself is concerned, he does not exist. He is not to be found in the books, except for the bone between his nose. He is not to be found until this very moment in any history of America. He is not to be found on the stage, insofar as we have one. He is not to be found in the movies, unless he's afraid of ghosts. He is not to be found on television unless he's pretty pale. Now, this is no stage joke, I'm telling you. You must consider what happens to a life which finds no mirror. You must ask yourself about your own life and how and by what means did you arrive at whatever identity you now think you have? And ask yourself whether or not it is true that we, all of us, take our estimate of ourselves from the eyes of other people, so that love becomes a very serious matter. It is by no means a mystical statement to say that love is all that can save you. I know that in this country and in this age, these sound like the ravings of a madman. But in fact, if you check it out yourself, try to deal with this life I've been trying to convey to you very, very sketchily. By the time it is 16 and has already turned away from any belief in other human beings, any trust at all, ask yourself why this life so soon is putting down the world, carrying knives and guns, and what yeoman labor one has got to be willing to do to reach this human being. My point is, one of my points is, that when a society does this, to a sufficient degree, the society is committing suicide. If you'll bear with me another minute, I will ask you to consider, I'm asking you to consider in your own lives. This is not an abstraction. At the moment, this is not even a civil rights rally. Consider what happens to the unloved. Consider what would have happened to you when the chips are down and we find ourselves without all these masks and all these clothes and all these pretensions and all these attitudes down there in the dark where everybody lives. And whatever got you out of it, if you got out of it. If this proposition or if this suspicion is correct, that is, if I am right in assuming that those who are unloved cannot live and cannot grow, let us by that tentative light consider the state of this nation. I am not very old, and I have not seen very much, but I have seen one thing. On the block that I was born, which is still there, where most of us perished, there was one great difference just the same between that sordid block in Harlem and the rest of New York City, to say nothing of the country. And the difference may sound mystical, but it was this. If a girl had a baby and she wasn't married, she wasn't stoned to death, and we took care of the baby. The morals didn't matter, especially the morals of this country, which doesn't believe in them and doesn't live by them. But she mattered, the girl mattered, and the baby mattered. It is intolerable to me to imagine for one moment that I would exchange that standard for the standards of this republic. It is inconceivable that anyone who wanted to live would try to live the way most white Americans live. This is, and I am speaking as a part of the country, and a country which I love, or I would not be here. Of all the places I have ever been, of all the things that I've ever seen, this country is in so many ways the most despairing and above all the most unloved. I don't mean unloved by other people. I'm not talking about Vietnam. I'm talking about the people who live in it, who do not love it enough to take care of it. You have to have a cataclysm in New York for people to speak to each other. And if there's anything rarer than real friendship between Americans, I would have a hard time naming it. Now, I know this sounds excessive, and I know you are thinking he is putting me on. But believe me, if we were, as I hope one day we will be, a civilized nation, name only one event, because there are so many. The acquittal of those people in Mississippi whom the entire world knows to be guilty. That farce, that impertinence, that obscenity should have sent millions of Americans into the streets. By what right does the governor of that state and its principal representative and J. Edgar Hoover, by what right do they insult us in so intolerable a way? And what is the wrong with this sovereign people who allow the government to say we can do nothing about it? It is late in the day for a country in which I have bled and died for nearly 400 years, in which I have been maligned perpetually until this very moment. And a marvelous question, what does the Negro want? It is late in the day for this country to pretend that I am not a part of it, and it is entirely indefensible that the government which can make me pay my taxes and put me in the army and say the Vietnamese, say nothing of the Cubans, can be with a straight face tell me later. Those men in Mississippi, and I'm speaking only of one event, killed 3 human beings. They killed them for nothing. For nothing. With our sanction and in our name. No one can tell me that we can do nothing about it. We've let chaos ride unchecked here. We made ignorance and youth the only virtues. It is a great American crime to be complex or double-minded. In fact, it is a great American crime to have any aspirations toward growing up. And with this peculiar arsenal that is our virtue, our ignorance, and our youth, we pretend to be able to conquer the world? Mexican kids of 10 already know far more about life than Eisenhower ever learned. I realized one thing. Well, I realized a few things, but I realized above all one thing. When I was living in Europe, which parenthetically I may say, I was driven to because I could not live here. I realized that the French and the English even, God bless them, and the Italians and the Spanish, the people with whom I dealt, the Algerians and the Africans, they didn't dislike Americans on sight. They were perfectly willing to deal with them man to man. But there was one fatal difficulty. They couldn't find the man. And I realized that those jokers wandering around Europe in their innocence, and there's something beautiful about it, but it has to end. They were resented not because they were cruel, not because they couldn't speak the language, not even because they made the extraordinary assumption that if you spoke louder, everyone would understand you. They began to be hated for a very simple reason, and we haven't learned it yet. They began to be hated because they did not know. They had no way of knowing that what they were facing was a man like them. They had no way of knowing this cat also bled. They had no way of knowing that the man they were talking to, the woman they were talking to, was a human being. She was not simply like a whore. He was not simply like a bum. He was not simply like a writer. She wasn't simply just an actress. They had a long tale to tell. And the Americans couldn't hear it, couldn't see it, didn't know it. Above all, didn't know it. And what they didn't know about them, what we, the Americans, don't know about the world, I suddenly realized is what Americans don't know about me. We have paid, and we are paying, I think, probably the most terrifying price in history for pretending that a man is not a man. Because by now, really, the entire country believes it. They really don't know why Negroes go to jail. They really don't know why they lay down on airports and tie themselves to cranes. They don't know that I'm not trying to get into a white neighborhood, I'm only trying to live. But they don't know that. It'll be one thing, really, if they knew it and denied it. We've been now so brainwashed. It demands so much nervous energy in the loins, in the heart, in the guts, to shake a Negro's hand. I really literally been through this. They walk away mopping their brows. Wow! And then they want a medal. I'm not kidding. This is sad, ladies and gentlemen. This is sad. It is not the Negro in this country There are not many of us here, really, you know. We're roughly 1/10 of the nation. We have suffered a long time. We've bled a long, long time. Some cat in the Congo, you know, said, I think I'm quoting right, too. We are now very upset about the massacre in the Congo, all of a sudden. I think I'm quoting him right. He said, blood gushing from a heart you love. Have you ever seen that? And I thought, and I think I'm a pretty good Christian, I thought, are you kidding? Blood gushing from a heart I loved? Are you just finding out what that feels like? We've endured it a very long time. A very long time. We have paid our dues. Ladies and gentlemen, we have paid our dues. It is not we. I want to make this very clear. As clear as I can. And do remember we're talking about a life. And remember that I said that before I repudiate the standards by which I grew up, which meant that the baby and the mother were more important than the morals, and live by the standards of this country, I would rather die. It is not we, the American Negro, who is to be saved here. It is you, the American Republic, and you ain't got much time. Thank you.